Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, I'm Tim Pinnell, and welcome to today's webinar about the changes to ISO 27002. This is a 45-minute webinar, and I'll run through the agenda in a second, but if you have any questions, please put them into the chat box. And when we get to the end, I'll run through them all and hopefully answer your questions. And if there's any that I can't answer, I'll let you know that and attempt to answer them after the presentation, after the webinar, and I'll get back to you then. And of course, as ever with NQA's webinars, a recording of this will be circulated at the end. But before we do get into the webinar, let me just give you a quick overview of NQA if you're new to NQA. We're America's #1 certification body in the aerospace sector, and in the UK, we're in the top 3 for ISO 9001, 14001, 45001, and ISO 27001, and of course we're seeing growing interest in standards such as ISO 22301 business continuity and ISO 27701 privacy information security management. We're #1 in China for automotive, and overall globally we're #1 for telecommunications and in the automotive sector. Globally we're #3 in the aerospace sector, and in the UK we're #2 in the aerospace sector, and we specialize in certification in high technology and engineering sectors. And we've been around for 30 years. We're a well-established brand with over 50,000 certificates globally, over 1,000 employees worldwide, and we're operating in over 90 countries. And typically, our customers stay with us for at least 10 years, providing a great deal of auditor consistency and constant good customer experience. Now, today's agenda. Today is all about the changes to ISO 27002. But it's not just that. We've got the changes. I'm going to talk through the new controls. And that's interesting because I'm also going to give you an auditor's insight as well, not just about the new controls and what an auditor might expect to see come audit time. I'm also going to talk about what it means for your ISMS and the implications and the changes you might have to make. Now, similarly, there are the family of 27,000 standards, and these changes to 27002 will have some implications for those. So if you're certified to 27017, 18, or 27701, there are factors to bear in mind. And then finally, transition timelines. That is a transition period for what will ultimately happen to ISO 27001 and what it will mean for you transitioning from the old version to the new version. But I'll explain that when we get to it. And as I said, at the end, some Q&A. Now, let's have a quick reminder, though, of ISO 27002. Now, I know for many of you this will be sucking eggs, but it's just worth a reminder to position ourselves and understand the difference. So in ISO 27001, there on the left, we've got the management system, those standard Annex SL management system clauses. But of course, 27001 has the Annex A, which makes it unique amongst the management system standards. And there are 114 controls grouped into those, separated into those 14 groups. Now, those are security controls. ISO 27002 similarly has 114 controls in 14 groups, but it provides guidance for those controls. So 27001 are the requirements against which you're audited. 27002 simply provides the guidance. And of course, as I'm sure you're well familiar, here's an example. If we look at 27001 for the control for labeling of information, it says an appropriate set of procedures for information labeling shall be developed. Well, of course, in 27002, it says an appropriate set of procedures for information labeling should be developed. And that's important because shall is a requirement, a should is guidance. And so from an auditing point of view, we also always audit against the requirement, not the guidance. So having established that, let's have a quick look then at the changes at a very high level. First of all, the title. Now in the old version, it says Information Technology, Security Techniques, Code of Practice for Information Security Controls. Whereas the new one has information security, but you can see it's got cybersecurity and privacy protection added to it. And that's the first clue about the changes to the standard. It's bringing or attempting to bring the standard up to date with modern information processing practices, and therefore the information security controls around those practices. So specifically for cybersecurity, we really are talking about the online world, particularly with the prevalence of cloud-based information processing, and then privacy protection as well. Ever since May 25th, 2018, GDPR and the Data Protection Act have been updated. They play a much greater role in our lives, and so any organization that is processing personal data, or PII, has to take those controls into account when it comes to information security. So here we go. The title has changed to include modern online practices and privacy. Of course, that also has implications for some of the other 27,000 family of standards, which we'll see. Now here's a big change. As I said, in the 2017 version has 14 control groups. Well, the new version has done away with those altogether and simply created 4 themes. Now, organizational, people, physical, and technology. And we'll see later how the controls are put into those different groups. And then the next change is into 2017, with those 14 groups, there were objectives. They no longer exist. And then the numbering of the controls. Again, there were 114 controls, but now there are 93. 19 of those controls have been consolidated. They've been merged. So if you were to think about the cryptographic control and the key management control or policies, they've been merged into one. There's some common sense changes there. 11 new controls have been added, and I'll be going through each of those. I've put N deleted control because in the original sort of marketing blurb that came out, there was a suggestion that some of the old controls had been deleted. Whereas in fact, in the back of the standard, the new standard, there is an annex that lists all of the old controls and their mapping to the new controls. Every old control is mapped to a new control. Therefore, it suggests that nothing has been deleted. But in fact, some of the controls are barely visible, but you can still see their intent or presence in the controls. This is a new concept that's been added, and again, as an example of bringing it into the current thinking, we have hashtags. But the idea here is that each control has a set of attributes, almost metadata, if you like, which helps create different views of the controls. Now, these are not something we'll be auditing against, but they will help you organize the controls and help you filter and understand them. So the first type is called a control type, whether it's a preventive, a detective, or a corrective control. And then you can see to which properties that control will apply, whether it's C, I, or A. It's got this column called Cybersecurity Concepts. So you've got protect, detect, respond, and recover. Identity is a key one, particularly if you're looking at things like zero trust models. It'll help you list the controls which are really applicable to identity management to zero trust, for example. The key one for me is operational capabilities. You can see there are a set of capabilities for mapping the controls. And then finally, over on the left, you've got the security domain hashtags. To be frank, I don't fully get what they mean by governance and ecosystem, or particularly ecosystem, and what value they add, but I'm sure through use, if you grow experience with them, that will become more obvious. So they can be used to create different view of controls. Here's 8.6 capacity management, and this is from the standard. This is a paste from the standard, and you can see here that it has 2 types of control. It is a preventive and a detective control. You can see under its information security properties that capacity management has nothing to do with confidentiality, which makes sense. It's an identify, protect, and detect control. And naturally, in terms of operational capabilities, it's very relevant to continuity. And then it has the security domains. However, these are entirely optional. We do not audit against the attributes. You can ignore them. You can create your own. So, for example, I've created a couple of new ones here. So, for example, if we imagine that in my risk assessment, I've got a number of risks, I've added those risks as attributes to each control. That would help me filter controls or risks to see which controls are treating which risks. If you're familiar with maturity capability levels, I've added those in as well. Implementation state, as you know, when you're creating an SOA, you have to list whether or not it's been implemented. Well, you can I've created different states of implementation. And similarly, I've added the owner of that control as the responsible department. As another attribute, the information security properties there, and then the operational capabilities. You can add as many as you like, or you can totally ignore them. But I will show you an example of how they can be useful later on when you are doing your mapping and realigning your statement of applicability to the new standard. So let's go through the new controls. First of all, threat intelligence. Now, this is a very interesting one because threat intelligence is a discipline in its own right. Certainly, many large organizations do this as a matter of course. They have an enormous threat surface. They're a high-profile organization. They are more likely to be attacked. And so that kind of horizon scanning, looking to see what kind of threats are coming their way, analyzing and determining what actions to do is really important. Smaller organizations, on the other hand, it might not be something you do. It might not be a capability that you have, or perhaps you've outsourced it. So when you are considering your risks and deciding whether or not to include threat intelligence, be careful on this one, because clearly at audit time, that would have to be followed through. Now, you're probably already doing a bit of this anyway. If you're getting vulnerability alerts from some of your vendors, you're then deciding whether or not to patch devices. It's part of control of technical vulnerabilities. That is an element of threat intelligence. But again, be careful when it comes to audit time, because there are two parts to this. One is collecting threat information, but the second part is the analysis. So from an auditing point of view, if you selected this control as applicable, I would be looking to see that you're gathering information and then that you're performing the analysis and how do you demonstrate that analysis. Nonetheless, particularly in the online world, and this is a cybersecurity concept, the threat intelligence can be a very important and useful control. Information security for the use of cloud services. This control strays into ISO 27017, which is a cloud services type standard. Nonetheless, many organizations now are using cloud services, be it AWS, Azure, or whatever, or even smaller providers. And certainly, from my point of view, when I'm auditing clients, it's almost it shouldn't be, well, it's up in the cloud, it's fine, don't worry about that. They are providing, or the cloud service provider is providing you with a whole bunch of security controls and is responsible for your crown jewels quite often, your data. Therefore, you should have around it a set of controls in place to make sure that the cloud services are meeting your information security requirements. And one of the things that we should never forget is the exit from cloud services. By and large, your virtual machines are deleted and that's fine, it's gone. But how do you know? ICT readiness for business continuity. This is very much making the information security element of business continuity a proper discipline, more aligning it to ISO 22301 business continuity. In the guidance, it mentions recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives. It is a much more considered and thorough control than the old control was, which was information security aspects of business continuity. I think it was a control that was frequently misunderstood by clients. Many clients assumed it was just about business continuity, whereas in fact it's about the information security of business continuity. And so this new control makes that much clearer in terms of how your information security supports your business continuity and the business continuity of your information security, with a set of controls and targets and KPIs around it. So any organization implementing this control will be in a really good place. And then if you're implementing 22301 as well, it'll be very complementary. Indeed, if you've already got 22301, much of the analysis for that would plug straight into this control, or vice versa. Now, physical security monitoring is probably a control that almost all of you have been doing for some time. This is a belated inclusion, I think, into the standard. But in essence, particularly where you've got your own premises, you've probably got CCTV, you've probably got PIRs, you've probably got door alarms, you might have mobile guarding patrols as well, all which are aspects of physical security monitoring. I would like to think it's going to be a relatively straightforward tick in the box or inclusion in your statement of applicability to have this control in here. And remember, where it says continuously monitoring, as I've just described, that is essentially a lot of autonomous monitoring. If you've got alerting generated and things like that, or you might have it going to an alarm receiving center. Now, configuration management, I think this control is probably arriving 20 years late. Many organizations have been successfully doing configuration management. And yet with the old standard, it was actually quite hard sometimes to pull that out as a particular requirement. At best, you might have, I might have covered it under secure system engineering principles, for example. But in this case, this is about hardening, securing equipment, hardware, software, networks, and services. And that's about hardening it and then monitoring it. Monitoring it to make sure that whatever your baseline hardening was, it hasn't had any unauthorized changes or changes that you're not aware of. So you've got to document it, have something in place to monitor it to ensure that it's not having any changes, and then review it. Because of course, as the security landscape changes, threats changes, your vendors change as well, new vendor advice comes out, that configuration management may well change. Configuration management in terms of security hardening is a living thing. Your management system, of course, is the ideal environment to make sure that continually happens. But this is a really important control. Many organizations will do it anyway, certainly in terms of, say, getting rid of vendor default settings and things like that. But it is a discipline and one that requires a bit of research and understanding, but really important nonetheless. Information deletion. Now, very much more starting to stray more into the privacy side of things. This control is not so bad in cloud services, where, as I said, a virtual machine can be deleted. But I know people who go onto eBay, buy up second-hand hard drives or routers and switches and attempt to recover configuration information and data and things like that. The point here is, and a question I would ask in an audit, how do you know you've deleted it? And so the deletion comes across, it's achieved by various methods, but nonetheless, it's about you having assurance that when you no longer require the information, particularly if it's personal data, you have successfully deleted it. Data masking, again, a privacy control. And if you read the guidance in 27002, it talks about anonymization and pseudonymization. The important thing here is understanding the difference and what they mean. Particularly pseudonymization is probably still personal data unless you really truly can't associate it with anything else. But you have to take into account or consider the extent to which you need to do data masking. There's going to be a degree of cost-benefit analysis here, whether it's whole disk encryption or row-level encryption in the database. These things can come at a cost and a performance hit as well. So when you're considering your risks and you decide to choose data masking is quite a broad topic. Consider carefully what kind of data masking you're going to implement and where you're going to implement it. And then come audit time, be able to evidence that. Data leakage prevention. This has been around for some time. It is one of those things which I think many organizations probably always wanted to have, but actually don't fully understand it or don't know what to do with it. And indeed, there is a spectrum of data leakage prevention tools. For example, Office 365 has various straightforward or simple data leakage prevention tools, right up to third-party commercial off-the-shelf tools, which are a whole discipline in their own right. Certainly, military and government organizations have some of those kind of things in place. So it's worthwhile investigating and working out whether you've got some of this in place or not, or what you would do to put it in place, what would be a cost-effective implementation. So again, when you're considering your risks, certainly given the great resignation that's going on at the moment, where there is evidence that vast amounts of data are leaving the organization, what can you do to do that? And there are various examples, such as even preventing the use of USB sticks and things like that being plugged into end user devices. But monitoring activities. A lot of organizations do this anyway, and certainly those organizations that are using, say, for example, Azure and AWS and some other large cloud vendors, there's a whole host of tools that can monitor anomalous behavior. Many organizations that don't have those things are recording all sorts of data into their logs, but actually are only evaluating those logs in the event of an incident or by exception. This control is more thinking about how to detect it in the first place. So we're often talking about automation here where possible, or repeated and regular analysis. And then it's taking appropriate actions to determine whether or not you move into your information security incident phase. As I said, you're probably already doing this anyway, but as part of your implementation, and you're demonstrating that it's been implemented, you're going to have to work out where that is actually happening. And I would suggest, this is something that can be tested during audit, that doing it by exception only is not monitoring. Now, web filtering. Now, web filtering, I would say, is definitely 20 years late to the party. And indeed, there is an argument to say now that web filtering is not as relevant as it used to be. So, of course, in the good old days when employees came to work and then they used their corporate device on the corporate network, which then went out via the corporate firewalls to the internet, you would have web filtering in place. Nowadays, many organizations allow native access in that, particularly with the home workers, so they're plugged into their broadband, they can go straight onto the internet, but if they want to get to corporate resources, they fire up a VPN. So if you select the web filtering control, understand your circumstances. It may be that you're allowing corporate native access and there is no corporate web filtering facility. And indeed, over the years, we've always, in the absence of this control, it's all been about user awareness, communications, acceptable use policy, and things like that. But in the new online world, many organizations that I audit don't have any form of web filtering at all, and they rely on user behaviors to do the right thing. That said, there are some host tools that are available as well. Many web filtering as a service type tools that can be implemented as well. But it's nice to see it finally arrive. Secure coding, well, yeah, again, this is a bit late to the party. Many organizations do it anyway. Again, under secure system engineering principles in audits, we tend to cover off secure coding. Now it's been called out as a thing in its own right. Bear in mind, though, if you do implement this, then we'll be looking for evidence to show that you are following secure coding principles, which means identifying what those secure coding principles are. And of course, they will vary from language to language. There are common ones, naturally, but they will vary from language to language. So come audit time, you'll need to be able to demonstrate what they are and then ideally see them in the code. Okay, so that was a quick canter through the new controls. Let's have a look at what it means for your management system. And I'm talking about this now because since 27002 is out, there is an emergency change happening to ISO 27001. That's only going to change Annex A to align to bring in the new controls. What it means is you're going to have to redo your risk assessment and redo your statement of applicability and your risk treatment plan. Now, why would you do your risk assessment? Well, in clause 8.2 in 27001, it says the organization shall perform information security risk assessments at planned intervals or when significant changes are proposed or occur. Well, I would suggest to you that this is a significant change. And anyway, it's coming up with a whole load of new controls, so why wouldn't you embrace those controls as industry best practice? Great, so you do your risk assessment. Clause 613B then says determine all the controls that are necessary to implement the information security risk treatment options and then compare those controls with those in Annex A and verify that no necessary controls have been omitted. So your Annex A will have the new controls, so you've then got to produce a statement of applicability. Remember, listing all of those controls, stating whether or not they're implemented, and so on. So how are you going to do this? Well, you're going to have to remap them. First of all, if you were to go onto the NQA website, I produced a document which allows you to do a two-way mapping between the standards. So there's a screenshot sample there. So on the left, you've got the old, and on the right, you've got the new, and you can see the numbering and how they map across. So that will help. But remember, I talked about the operational attributes, and I've listed them there, starting at governance, going down to information security assurance. Well, actually, if you do a bit of a filter on those controls, if you put all those controls into a spreadsheet and then filter them by their operational attributes, you can see that the governance attributes very much map to the old A6 Organization of Information Security. Surprise, surprise, the asset management attribute maps to the asset management. And you can see it goes all the way down that. Now, it's not complete and it's not exact. So, for example, there could be plenty of controls that would go into information protection or perhaps not. You can see there's no A10 there, that's cryptography. Well, that goes somewhere in there, system and network security, I think, and application security. So you can cut it in many ways. But nonetheless, there is that bit of pain where you're going to have to create a new statement of applicability by remapping all of your existing controls and your risks. The operational attributes are going to help. Now, if you have these other standards, 27017 Cloud Services Security, 27018 Processor Cloud Privacy, and then 27701 Privacy Information Management. You can see that they extend the controls in the old version of 27002 and provide new controls. But they're not going to change, and there are no plans to change these. So in essence, you're still going to hang on to the old version of 27002 for the guidance. But from a statement of applicability point of view, that's fine because of the bit of mapping there, but also 27001 allows you to include any other controls you think necessary. Some organizations create separate statements of applicability. Some create one single statement of applicability. It's up to you how you do it, but bear in mind, you're still going to have to hang on to the old version of 27002 as we go forward. So, the transition timeline. So I want to lower expectations now. We're waiting for the IAF and UCAS to come up with the actual dates. Now expect the emergency change to 27001 to happen possibly in May, maybe a bit later, but sometime this year. So the point is, looking at that first point, the transition period will begin and all existing certificates to ISO 27001-2013 will expire 2 years from the last day of the month of the release and publication of the updated version of 27001. So this is what I think is going to happen. This is what's happened, for example, from 22301, similar thing here, although that was extended because of COVID. So if we assume it's going to be released in May, then all existing ISO 27001-2013 certificates will expire May 2024, because it is only a 2-year transition period as opposed to 3, which is normal. I'm told that it's only 2 years because there are big changes coming along to Annex SL in 2025, so they want to get this transition period out of the way. And actually, because it's a change to Annex A only, as opposed to a fundamental change to the standard, that might be a bit easier. Now, at some point in that transition period, the certification bodies are going to stop doing initial and recertification audits to the old standard, and they will only be done on the new standard. At some point, all transition audits should be completed, and then by end of, let's say, May 2024, all the old certificates will no longer be valid. But as I said, all of this has to be confirmed. If you are subscribing to NQA's In Touch magazine, or you follow the blog on LinkedIn, as soon as we know, we will tell you. It'll be in touch, it'll be online. You'll probably hear it from various other parties as well, and we'll be able to provide a lot more guidance on how it will actually happen. If you've been involved in transitions before, perhaps most recently to 9001, then you'll be entirely familiar with the process. Okay. So there we go. That was a quick canter through the standard. I'll open this up to questions now, and let's see what we've got. Please don't hesitate to type questions. Now I have one here. Several questions, just bear with me. Hi, Tom, nice to see you. And then Tom, cloud services. Would it be enough to demonstrate that you understand the terms and conditions of cloud services? Well, it's an interesting question. So this was about having those controls around your cloud services. The term, it depends who your cloud service provider is. Now, if you're using one of the big providers like Azure or AWS, you get what you're given, and you sign up to their terms and conditions and processes. Whereas if they're a smaller cloud service provider, or even some form of managed service provider, then it may be that you are able to impose your requirements on them. So the answer is Tom, yes, possibly, could do. And then Tom, another one, physical monitoring. How could this impact working from home only businesses? Tom, that's a great question. And one of the things I regularly talk about is that physical monitoring and the extent to which that is applicable to home workers, arguably not a lot. So how could this impact working from home only businesses? It probably wouldn't. You may well successfully argue that that control is not applicable. And then Tom, another question. Lovely. Web filtering. Could this be demonstrated by some out-of-the-box warnings and filtering the likes of Chrome and other browsers offer? It really does depend on how you've implemented. What I don't want to do is ask you to log on or go and try and visit a naughty website and see if it gets blocked. It starts with your policy and what the organization wants and expects. It may be your acceptable use policy, which is then implemented as a form of web filtering. And that can be demonstrated in policies as well. And then Rachel has asked, is there a specific time frame for these changes, such as an updated SOA, need to be implemented by? It needs to be implemented by the time of your transition audit. So whenever we come to do, be it your next surveillance or recertification audit, within the transition period, that's when you will have needed to update your SOA by. Of course, you can update it at any time before then. Michelle, I have my ISO 9001 and 27001 recertification audit in the next 23 to 26 months. Do I have to, next month, I'll reread that. Recertification audit next month, 23 to 26 of May. Do I have to incorporate the new changes? Well, Michelle, there's no guarantee that the new version of 27001 will have been published. You may be jumping the gun there, and in which case you will still be audited against the old version of the standard. So it really will be down to timing of the publication. It may benefit you to hang on for a bit and leave it until the following year. And certainly if it's a surveillance audit, then the time pressures are slightly different as well. But it is all down to the timing of the publication. And Chris, with 27022 spreading its wings further into cloud, privacy, security, and business continuity, do you think this will affect the uptake of the respective standards, such as 22301, 27701, and 27017? Yeah, Chris, you know what? That's a question that I've had internally. As a consequence of the pandemic, we think there's been a massive uptake in 27001, and you would have thought you'd have seen a similar uptake in 22301, and that's not been the case. By and large, because many organizations, which are information processing organizations, or information processing is a large part of what they do, have been able to send people home, and they've counted that as their business continuity measure. Well, of course, business continuity is a lot more than that. And so in those organizations' minds, it may be that the existing 27001 controls are sufficient. And certainly with the business continuity element becoming more like 22301, it makes the standard more complete, and so you might not move into 22301. But the important thing to note is 22301 is not just about information security. It is about the business continuity ostensibly of the organization as a whole, or the things that really matter, those things that allow you to continue to deliver products and services and remain viable. So it goes way beyond information security. It can be manufacturing, all sorts of things like that. So it really does depend on what the client wants. Insofar as 27017 and 27018, yeah, it's a really good point. Actually, the standards do offer a lot more than 27001. Clients will need to take a good view on those and decide whether or not it's relevant for them. As for PIMS 27701, no, I think it won't affect the uptake of PIMS. PIMS is an excellent standard in its own right. I've run other webinars on that, and there are material on the NQA website, and that has been designed to meet privacy legislation globally. In fact, in the standard itself, it's got a mapping to the GDPR clauses. I would like to think, and I suspect it's going to be the case, it will continue to grow that standard. We're seeing a lot of interest in it. Naomi, in your opinion, do the changes warrant an investment in new tech tools to achieve these requirements? Well, Naomi, I hope I've made the point. There is a spectrum of tools available. For example, some of the data leak prevention tools are already in Office 365, or you can spend thousands and thousands on a big off-the-shelf thing, or you can engage a third party to do it for you. So it really does depend on your risk assessment and how much you think you need to invest given that level of risk and your risk appetite. If something like IPR is really, really important to you, let's say you're a medical tools research and development organization or pharma research type organization where IPR protecting those secrets are really, really important, then DLP, for example, is probably where you'll invest quite a bit, as opposed to other organizations which, for example, software development organizations are happily using the existing controls in Git and things like that. Then it may be not so important, but it is that risk-based view on whether or not it's worth investing in them. Tim, will the transition affect our surveillance audit scheduled for October this year? Well, Tim, there's a 2-year period. So if the standard's out earlier this year, you could transition in surveillance audit this year. Let's assume you've got a surveillance next year, then you could do that as well. And again, depending on the timing, it may even be in early 2024 that you choose to do it. John has said, if I'm starting the transition, will I need to maintain SOA RTP for both versions? I'm not sure why you'd maintain both versions. The transition, if you like, is almost a cutoff. You've got your controls in the new version of 27001, and you stop using the old version. I'm trying to think of a reason why you would maintain both. If the mapping document or your mapping of controls is accurate and up to date, you should be able to demonstrate that continuity of risk treatment all the way through, because of course that's an important point. When you're doing your risk reviews, if there are any changes as a consequence of the new controls, you need to be able to show that. And so you would probably maintain your old SOA for simply continuity purposes, but actually for an auditing point of view, no, you wouldn't need to have that. Michael says, I noticed a slide on cybersecurity concepts mirrors the NIST framework. Identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Any advantage need to correlate the two? Michael, that's exactly where it's come from. As far as I'm aware, that's where the committee have decided to align it to the NIST framework. NIST framework being globally recognized as a good thing. I suspect that by aligning with the NIST framework, it will also help global uptake of 27001. I know there's always been lower uptake in the Americas. Whereas I think this will align it. So in terms of any need to correlate the two, there's no need, but certainly there is an advantage if you're familiar with the NIST framework, then that will help you understand the controls better in that framework and will may well help your information security governance as well. Kevin, am I correct that NQA will need to be accredited by UCAS before you're allowed to audit against the new version? Certainly UCAS will be coming along as part of our regular accreditation audits to check that we are meeting the standards. But this is a change to Annex A, not to the management system standard. But that's a good point, Kevin. I'm going to go and check against that. As I said, because this is a change to Annex A as opposed to the management system. But I will come back on that. I'm not entirely sure yet. Okay. Okay, and then Dave. In my experience, 27,000 awarders are generally not too knowledgeable on data privacy laws. Do you see that changing? Interestingly enough, Dave, one of my roles in NQA is to upskill and maintain the continuous professional development of NQA's auditors. And a major focus on that is privacy legislation and laws and requirements. Without doubt, with the control, with the new control, including more privacy concepts, auditors are going to have to become more familiar with it if they're not already. So whoever your CV is, then it would be worth asking the question, what are they doing to upskill their auditors for the new controls? As far as NQA is concerned, I'm responsible for our auditors' continuous professional development in that respect, and I will be upskilling them. Well, to be frank, in terms of privacy, they're already there anyway. Sarah, do we have any rough ideas as to when the auditors will cease to audit against 27,000 in 2013? Yeah, if we go back to that earlier slide, the penultimate sort of orange bullet point in there is when it's going to happen. You know, I really don't want to nail my colours to the mast here on that one. I really want to wait for the IAF and UCAS guidance on that one, Sarah. And again, as I said, as soon as we know, we'll publish it and let you know. Can a company get certified? Oh, this is Tom. Hello, Tom again. Can a company get certified to these new requirements before they have to submit to new controls during the 2022-23 surveillance audits? You could add them into your statement of applicability as an additional set of controls, but until we cease auditing to the old standard, you can't be certified to the new standard. As soon as the transition period starts, you can. I hope that answers your question. So there we go. I have no more questions from everybody. Anybody? Thank you very much for coming on. I hope you found it interesting and useful. As I said at the beginning, this presentation will be made available. It'll be sent out to you all as a recording. Stay in touch with us via the In Touch magazine. Connect on LinkedIn and keep up to date with things there. And if you've got any other questions, please just get in touch and I'll be very happy to answer them the best I can. Thanks very much indeed, and goodbye.